Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to today's Sangha Live, this week's Sangha Live. If we've not met before, my name is Milla, and I'm going to be your meditation guide for this week. And it's really lovely to be here. Let me just check that my sound is okay. Feel free to put any comments in. I might not be able to do too much right now, but it's something that we can sort later if there are any issues. It's lovely to see you all coming in and saying hi. And I hope you've had a good weekend. It's been like incredibly sunny here. I've been out lots picking blackberries and enjoying the amazing sunsets. So, okay, thank you for the thing about the sound. That's great. Most of the time, my work involves supporting people who are either working to disrupt and transform harmful systems or working to reduce the suffering of others kind of caused by those harmful systems. So I usually work with charities and activists in various different ways. And I see our Dharma practice, I see my Dharma practice as a kind of mirror of these efforts. And I really love exploring the ways that these two worlds intersect and support one another and kind of like interesting to each other in different ways. So I'm really happy to be here as part of your practice, as part of that kind of interaction. And each day I'm going to say a few words on the theme I've chosen. And for this week, it's all about comfort and discomfort in practice, but also in life. And after I've said a few words, we'll have a largely silent sit for about half an hour or so, depending on the timing. And then there'll be some time for discussion and questions. And I'm really open to kind of continuing those discussions and hearing your reflections, both during the sessions and afterwards. Yeah, and you can reach me through all my details on the Sangha Live. And I see my role here as sort of holding a shared space for everybody's shared practice. So please view the ideas that I share and any guidance I give as a kind of invitation. I kind of try and work in an invitational way and take up as much or as little as feels useful to you. I kind of feel it's important to say that not all meditation guidance works for everyone or at all. And so if things don't land for you, or if your meditation practice feels more accessible on some days than others, or with some people's guidance, but not with others, that's completely normal and very unlikely that you're doing something wrong or kind of failing at meditation in some way. All right, so my theme is comfort and discomfort in the path and in life. And broadly, I'd like to talk about a couple of ways that I have certainly kind of maybe slightly misinterpreted or misunderstood things. Some kind of ways that we can, perhaps you also can sometimes find some, I don't know, some challenges, or for me, there were a couple of mistakes. One of which was assuming that the practice is all about getting rid of suffering, getting rid of discomfort, getting rid of pain, and like never having any more. That's really the purpose. Because I think an initial reading of, the Four Noble Truths, or quite a lot of the teaching, can seem like that initially anyway. So the one challenge that I had was kind of seeing it all as bad, and kind of the practice is all about getting rid or getting away. And then the other thing is perhaps about bundling all kind of bad things together, or things I perceive as bad together. So suffering, pain, discomfort, confusion, delusion, like everything, just like the bad stuff that I'm trying to get away, but seeing it all as kind of one whole. And as I've been thinking about how to share these ideas, I've gone around in circles a little bit. And often with Dharma sharing, it's really good to start with a story or a way in that's really real for you as the person kind of sharing the story. So I wanted to say a little bit about my own journey, and in the hope that there are some parallels that maybe feel alive for you. So I hope that that's all right with all of you. So when I came to Dharma practice, maybe 20 years ago, something like that, I was suffering a lot. And so this promise of or this apparent promise of getting away from suffering sounded really great. I was in quite a lot of emotional pain, and philosophically, I felt like I was like a bundle of loose threads. There were lots of things I felt were important, but they didn't feel connected. I knew that the way I felt was really different to maybe mainstream thinking or mainstream approaches to life. I didn't really know how or why. I just felt really wrong. I had a few kind of leadings in my heart. I knew I was attracted to kind of quietness and slowness. I knew busyness wasn't the answer because I tried that. And I knew that I wanted my values and my life to be cohesive, to add up in some way, but I just had no idea how. So it was like a yearning, but no way of figuring it out. I felt all out of kilter. And it became kind of more and more urgent as I became, an adult and independent in the world. So emotionally, I had a lot of suffering. Philosophically, I felt just off. And so I went through a process of seeking and exploring. And I bet all of you have done this as well, or maybe, you're doing it now. And this is all part of it. For me, I found Quaker practice, which can involve, part of it involves sitting quietly in a room with people for an hour, people with similar commitments and ethics. And that was wonderful. Also, I got it very into nonviolence theory and practice and training as a facilitator, which is a kind of whole spiritual approach in itself, in my view. And I started doing some meditation in the Buddhist context, which was also helpful, and lots of other things that kind of helped me along the way. But those were some of the threads. And things started to settle. I began to be in less immediate pain and direct discomfort. I had more tools at my disposal for working with difficult times, with conflict, with unhappiness, and so on. And then I went on a 6-week evening course called What is Buddhism? And that really was a moment for me where things started to come together in terms of the ideas and the philosophy. I started to go on retreats, including with people from the Plum Village tradition, Plum Village monastics, who used to run these Quaker Buddhist retreats at the Woodbrook Centre near Birmingham, which were a real taste of Dharma practice. So I started to feel as if all these loose and separate strands that had been knocking around in my heart and mind, they had a place to go, and they were part of something cohesive. The Dharma in this elegant way, brought together so many of my clumsy instincts or my moral leanings into something that was just so well thought through. And I felt a great ability to breathe out. It was a great relief for me. So at that point in my practice life, it very much was about getting away from suffering, and the Dharma was the path to kind of get away, get rid. And that is often how it was presented to me at that time. Life is full of pain. These practices can get you out of it, out of the kind of pit of confusion and pain. All the suffering can be left behind, and you're on a kind of linear journey where it's just going to get ever less suffering and ever less discomfort. And for me, that's really how it felt emotionally and philosophically. I was kind of getting relief, like getting a rest. But then I found, much to my surprise, that the practices and tools I had been using, or maybe the way of looking at things that I had been using to get me out of this intense suffering, were not necessarily the right things for whatever I wanted to do next. Like I'd climbed out of this hole and I was standing there blinking in the sunlight with, a rope ladder and a stick that had got me up and out. But these were not necessarily the most useful tools for the next steps I might take, like going down the road or finding a home or whatever else was next in my life. And yet these were the tools that had got me so far, and it was a little bit confusing. And so this initial motivation, all about getting relief from the intense suffering, somehow wasn't quite the right thing for the next steps. And I think it's because I had made these couple of mistakes. One was that I was in fact getting away from bad things. Maybe it was more correct that I was changing and my relationship to what I was thinking of as bad things was changing. So we were kind of changing each other. And then this other mistake that I mentioned at the top, that I had kind of squashed together all the bad things that I wanted to get away from in a way that actually was really confusing. And this is where the idea of discomfort and maybe my approach to it being an issue comes in, because I had squashed together pain, confusion, suffering, discomfort, just all these bad things. I wanted to be pain-free, confusion-free, discomfort-free. I just associated it with bad things. It was a signal that suffering was around. So my practice was kind of to get rid of it, to reduce it, to eliminate it. And I think that started to be counterproductive. I think it started to move me away from life rather than towards life. So I got into the ability to survive better, like what I'm calling the pit. I got out of the pit. But it seemed that a lot of the things that were going to be then meaningful and valuable to me seemed to include discomfort. And maybe I might need to adapt my kind of impulse to recoil and learn to work with it, or maybe even go towards it. Because when I was just recoiling from it, it took me very much like away from life, and actually in the end away from my practice. Because discomfort is kind of everywhere and not only in bad things. I've come to think of it as like a kind of wrapping paper. And sometimes some discomfort arises and it is actually wrapping around something we don't want. Something problematic, something harmful, something we do want to avoid. But for me anyway, it's very similar wrapping paper around things that are merely unfamiliar. That old habit of mistaking the familiar for the good, mistaking the unfamiliar for the bad. Unfamiliar things can be like learning, intimacy, the strange kind of dance of conflict, finding new ideas, changing our minds, sometimes travel, even finding out that we're wrong, that I'm wrong, feels very uncomfortable. But there's no way to engage fully and freely with the world and without all these things. And I can sometimes be kind of triggered by the sensation of discomfort that is a natural part of this process. Oh, are we still frozen? I just noticed. Uh-oh. Is anyone not frozen? Probably. Oh. Back now? Okay. Sorry about that. Well, I was just rattling off lots of examples of ways that discomfort can be wrapped around things we might want. I'll briefly recap what some of those things might be. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for letting me know. So some of the things that might be actually good things wrapped around, that the discomfort comes wrapped around, might be learning or intimacy, the strange and unusual intimacy of conflict, new ideas, changing our minds, travel, finding out that we're wrong can be just so uncomfortable. But all of these things make a meaningful life possible, a life where we're engaging with things that we have cause to value happen. Very hard to engage fully and freely with the world if we're avoiding intimacy, new ideas, changing our minds, feeling wrong, setting boundaries, stating our needs, hearing when someone else is setting boundaries. You know, so many useful and constructive processes, often accompanied by real discomfort. Sometimes if I'm in a disagreement with someone and I get a sense of discomfort about it, even after all the work I've done thinking about this and learning about it, I can still think, oh, I've got to get rid of that discomfort. I can still try and kind of look around, cast around, try and fix it until I remember that, right, if I'm disagreeing with somebody, it's just going to feel uncomfortable, and that's all right. So anyway, this is my theme for the week. And I told my story of my kind of path with this idea of discomfort as a way, hopefully, to open it up. The idea that discomfort is not necessarily bad, more a natural part of life, and that good and bad things can come wrapped up in it. Maybe thinking of it as like a dashboard light that goes off when the unfamiliar happens. And I think that discomfort is a really natural part of spiritual life as well, both on the cushion and off. I think as we're engaging with our inner practice and our outer practice, we can kind of choose which route we're going to take. We can choose the engaged approach, which is very much what Martin talks about, and what Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, and what many teachers talk about, the engaged approach to our inner and our outer lives. And that there are a couple of other, big strands or big ways that we can use spiritual practice. One might be the transcendent approach, to go away to somewhere else in our inner lives or in our outer lives. And there's also what I call the accommodationist spiritual life, where we reduce discomfort by making ourselves frictionless, by changing ourselves to fit in with the world, by not admitting there are problems, therefore having no problems. And these three strands are something I'm going to talk about tomorrow. The engaged spiritual life, the transcendent approach, the accommodationist approach. And yeah, that's my Dickens-style cliffhanger for the day. You have to come back for the next installment to hear about those three things. But for the moment, let's sit together. I'll guide us in a little bit, but we'll have largely a silent sit. And then we'll have some questions or reflections at the end. And if you already have questions or reflections in your mind that you think you might want to share, feel free to make a note. Get them off your mental list so you can relax together into practice. All right, so please feel free to Make yourself comfortable if you aren't already. Setting up for meditation. Making any movements you like, stretches, wriggles, yawns. You may be sitting or lying down or standing or even moving. It's all welcome. But whatever position you're taking, finding a way to be grounded. Finding a way to be settled. Finding a way to be both solid and free in your posture and in your heart mind. And taking a moment to check in with your physical experience. Almost like you're taking a kind of tour of your physical experience, just checking in. How are you doing? Seeing what comes back. And if there are any areas that feel a bit stiff or tense or off, inviting them to relax a little bit, soften a little bit. Don't have to soften the whole way, just a little 5% more relaxed in any of those places. And then connecting with your experience, with your aliveness right now, wherever that is showing up. Could be a general sense, or you might be focusing on your breath or your hands or some other aspect of your physical experience, or on sound, whichever object you choose. It's very welcome. Settling into that connection with the reality of your experience. And we'll sit quietly together now. So now as we come towards the end of practice together, allowing yourself to shift, connecting or inviting a sense of gratitude for this practice, for this community, for your teachers, for this path, and all the peers and students and guides and supporters who make the causes and conditions for your practice to flourish. Allowing a sense of gratitude to arise for them and for everyone here, part of that picture, that community. So I invite you now, if you have any questions or reflections that you are moved to share, feel free to put them in the chat. Whether that's for one another or for me, all very welcome. Seeing one another's reflections, I think, can be so helpful on the journey, whether people are, new to the practice or have been practicing for some time. I think it's always really interesting to hear from the adventure or the experience that others are having. And as you know, this platform runs on the generosity of the community. And so please also share dana if you like, which is financial contribution towards the running of everything, and all of the support that is offered from Sangha Live and this week from me. And I think we'll put the link in the chat. Thank you, George. All right, so I'm going to sit quietly, see if there are any questions or reflections, and if they're not, that's okay too. And whatever discomfort or comfort arises in the day, just encourage you to notice it and engage with it and to see what it's all about. When I say discomfort, do I mean dukkha? Good question. When I first started writing or down my thoughts for this week, I did think that's what I meant. But I think what I mean is that it's an aspect of dukkha, maybe quite minor. And as you probably know, the Buddha talked about different types of dukkha, and I think there's lots to go into there that I'm not necessarily an expert on, but broadly 2 types. One is the unavoidable, old age, sickness, and death, which we can't make go away, and so the wise response is to become kind of gracious around them, and that's part of the Eightfold Path, and understanding all of these other Buddhist ideas that apply to those aspects of dukkha, old age, sickness, and death. And then there's the dukkha that we make ourselves by reacting rather than responding, by being sort of outraged by all of the kind of clinging and aversion that arises when we think that we are a separate, lasting, solid self. And so a lot of the teaching is about letting go or transforming those avoidable aspects of dukkha so that we can deal more graciously with the unavoidable aspects of dukkha. And I guess I'm kind of making the argument that if we stay engaged in our practice and in our lives, then discomfort belongs in the unavoidable aspects of dukkha. It belongs in the basket with old age, sickness, and death. Sort of old age, sickness, death, and feeling a bit awkward are probably the things that we learn to get gracious around rather than necessarily completely transforming. I don't know. My thinking is still evolving on this, but that's how I'm approaching it. It's a kind of as an aspect of dukkha, but sort of far from the whole picture. Laura says, your story of getting rid of suffering in a linear way and then realizing discomfort was around good things as well as bad really resonates with me. Good. I'm glad. I was hoping so. It wasn't just a self-indulgent rattling on about my story. Right. This is frequent interruptions. I'm sorry about that. We'll try and figure that out. And Nika says, wait, let me read these questions. It might be interesting to go in a different order. I'm going to come back to your question, Nika. Catherine says, thank you, Milla. I really like the idea of discomfort, sun as being a heavenly messenger. Yes, made me think about trying not just to soften in the face of discomfort, but also to ask myself, what is the learning here? Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. Josie says, do I offer in-person sessions or groups in London? Not right now, but I do online coaching. And I would be open to offering in-person things, maybe. I don't know. But please get in touch with me if you're interested in either of those things and we can talk about it. But yeah, nothing currently. This is my main way of teaching when I get invited on here. Okay, so Nika says, I realized that during a visit with a relative, I felt a lot of discomfort because she constantly devalued people and I felt a lot of inner resistance. I know she's not doing well at the moment, which surely fosters a judgmental mindset, but I was repeatedly in conflict with myself about when to point out her behavior and when to gently overlook it and focus on my compassion for her. By the evening, I was really exhausted. Do you have any advice? Yes, that's such a classic kind of situation where someone is transgressing our boundaries or our values, or you're seeing someone that you're close to not practicing values that for you are very important. And yes, we can be compassionate and we can understand where that's coming from. And you say you're in conflict about when to point out her behavior and when to gently overlook it and focus on my compassion for her. Okay, advice. And I don't know enough about the situation to really give straight up advice because I don't know her and I don't know you. But what can I say? I guess what's coming up for me is maybe there's another option. So you've made a kind of distinction between overlooking it and focusing on compassion and wanting to point out her and pointing out her behavior. And I wonder if there's a third option, which is to share how her behavior affects you. So to say that something makes you, how something makes you feel, as opposed to describing necessarily what they're doing. And to then do that with compassion, both for yourself and for her, which slightly takes kind of a middle way away from unnecessarily blame or focus on a behavior being right or wrong, but merely to point out the resonance of that behavior in the relationships. So like, I find it really difficult when you say that. It makes me feel like sad and confused and I don't like it, you know? saying that you don't like something or that you think something is not okay is remarkably powerful, kind of overlooked move with boundary setting. And to balance compassion for yourself and for her, because you matter too. And yes, constantly forcing yourself to overrule your own boundaries and your own values to kind of allow someone else's behavior is exhausting, and you deserve to have a good time too. So I hope that helps you to choose a kind of not middle way, kind of a joint way, a jointly compassionate way. Okay. Jill says, I'm not feeling at all gracious about old age, sickness and death. Get depressed and angry. Yeah. I hear that. Doro says, more about discomfort and conflict. I nearly wrote managing discomfort, which is, I think, what I do. Any other more specific questions would be very welcome, but I will think about that and respond with some tea. For me, I think with conflict, it's just always uncomfortable. I think it's really hard to be in conflict and to feel comfortable with it. For me, it just generates a general sense of unease, which can stay even when, I'm not actively talking to the person or whatever. And so at that point, it is for me about accepting that discomfort will be there and treating discomfort as a guest, and basically not worrying about it too much, I think. Yeah, like making it the right size. I imagine like a basket, and maybe the discomfort can be like a huge rock in the basket, and you're like, oh my God, how do I manage this? But actually, maybe there's other things in the basket too, and maybe actually the basket is quite big, and it's just like one thing among many that's happening as part of a conflict or as part of a wider system of relationships that within which the conflict is happening. And so, to right size it, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of what's coming up with for me in response. And be with it, allow it to be there, sort of thing. You don't have to like it, but you maybe also don't need to manage it. I don't know. I don't know enough about your situation. It may be there's some physical responses to respond to directly, but allowing the discomfort to be there and being like, yeah, well, it's conflict. There's going to be some. That's my approach anyway. I hope that's helpful. And I can see now that we're pretty much at time. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your practice and your sincerity and your creation of this community, which is a wonderful privilege to dip into and to be part of. All right, I'll see you tomorrow for the next installment.